Hey guys, and welcome back to Planet Mithril, and we are back today with a long overdue and long awaited Let's Talk Tabletop. And today we're talking about everyone's favourite wizard, a key member in the Fellowship and a key player in the events of the War of the Ring, Gandalf. We're going to be touching on both Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White, as there are two incarnations and two profiles in the book for the models in the profile. And now you guys might say this is a bit late. It's been a little while since we've done these, but I would argue, in fact, I'm going to refer to Gandalf for this one.
A wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
Also, as you can see, I'm trying to emulate Gandalf with my beard at the moment. I need to shave this off. So let's kick straight off with Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf the Grey is a 170-point hero of legend, so he can lead 18 warriors in his warband, but generally speaking, in the Fellowship, there's generally only 9, possibly 10 if you take golems, so that feels fairly irrelevant here. I think it has more bearing on the Hobbit variant, and the fact you can take him in Lake Town lists as well, so I think that's probably where that comes more into play. Gandalf the Grey is a movement 6 model, as he is a man-sized infantry. He is fight value 5 with a shoot value of 4+, so he's no slouch in combat. I don't quite know why he's got a shoot value, because he hasn't really got any missile weapons, so that's an interesting choice. I suppose everyone has to have a shoot value, just in case. He is strength 4, defense 5 with 1 attack, 3 wounds, courage 7. He has 3 might, 6 will, with a little asterisk, and we'll go into that in a minute, and 3 fate. So it's a fairly healthy stat line. The only low end of the spectrum tends to be his attacks. Because he's a wizard, he's a buff piece, he's a support piece. He's not really one for the old combat. Special equipment, he is equipped with Glandring, which gives him +1 strength when making strikes. So it takes him to a hearty strength 5. So he's wounding the defense 6-7 warriors on 5s, which is pretty good. He also has his Staff of Power. So that little asterisk on the 6 means that while he has his Staff of Power, and while he has at least 1 will point remaining in his base store, he gains 1 point of will for free. So every turn, you can spend a point of might to cast a magical power, basically for free. He also has the Elven Ring Naya, which is a super cool bit of equipment. It lets him re-roll any failed fate rolls. So if he does get himself in a sticky situation, takes a few wounds and carks them, he can re-roll those and give himself another chance at surviving. So it takes a little bit more pressure off of him having to keep his might around, especially when you're factoring in might being used for channeling and to push through some of the magical powers which are more beneficial. So it gives him a little bit more flexibility and freedom in regard to that. So he has 3 heroic actions available to him. He has Heroic Resolve, Heroic Channeling, and Heroic Strike. So Resolve means he can, again, he's a buff piece. He helps the rest of your army out, helps the rest of your Fellowship out. So he gives everyone else within 6 an extra point of will to resist magical powers, which is super good when it comes to things like hobbits who are resistant to magic. So that buff stacks as well. Heroic Channeling means he gets access to the stronger variants of all the magical powers. And Strike, meaning he can increase his fight value by d6 to go toe-to-toe with some of the big beasties. Although with the 1 attack available on his profile, I don't very often think that's going to come up. You don't really want to be spending his might in combat unless he's managed to get himself in combat by not of his own means, and is about to get pummeled and punched by multiple goblins. That's kind of like a life or death type scenario. I tend to think you want to be keeping his might points to push those spells through and to keep other things alive. But that's just how I think this variant of Gandalf works on tabletop. He has options for a cart or a horse, so he can be a movement 10 horse cavalry piece, which gives him a bit more flexibility and a lot more maneuverability on the tabletop, meaning he can race to different positions and help out magically where he needs to, as and when, a bit more easier than his stat 6 foot variant. Alternatively, he can have the cart, which is a 25-point upgrade. Only movement 8 and a bigger base, so it's a bit hard to get the extra manoeuvrability out of him when he's on cart. But it does have a super cool rule. At the start of the shoot phase, you can launch a firework from the back of your cart. On a 4+, you choose 1 enemy model within range, and that model suffers a strength 1 hit. So it's a fun little bonus thing to see a little firework hitting an Uruk square in the face, and if it kills an Uruk, even better. Obviously, being Middle-earth's most famous and grandest wizard, he has a multitude of magical powers available to him. And we'll touch on them just very briefly. We're not going to go into detail on all the spells, otherwise it'll be an hour and a half video, and that's not the point of these Let's Talk Tabletops. So he has blinding light, which means anyone within 6 who gets shot at, the enemy cannot hit you unless you roll a natural 6. Terrifying Aura, which again is an exhaustive spell. Until he runs out of will points, enemy models have to take a courage test to charge him. Immobilize, which basically means if you succeed to cast on a enemy model, that model cannot fight or strike blows if it wins. Command, you can move enemy model around, I think it's 3 inches, and then they suffer the immobilized/transfixed effects of the spell. Protection of the Valor, which is one that I don't think I've ever really used. It hasn't really come up whenever I've played Gandalf, but basically means you target one of your friendly models, and that model cannot be affected by enemy magic powers or special rules, which is pretty nasty when you think about some of the special rules that are available in the game, especially when you think about some of the bigger, hittier pieces with some of the more brutal special rules and powers available to them. Making one of your Fellowship members or one of your army members immune to that is pretty cool, actually. We have Strength and Will, which immediately restores 1 point of will to a friendly model in your army. Collapse Rocks, which basically, this is probably the most situational spell Gandalf has available to him. If an enemy model is standing in, within, or around a ruin or rocky area, you can collapse that piece of terrain, and that model suffers a Strength 5 hit, which is super cool, super themey for Gandalf, but also probably isn't going to come up very often. I think, actually, to be honest, I probably use this less than Protection of the Valor, and I haven't used that very often. And of course, everyone's favourite, or used to be everyone's favourite before it got nerfed, Sorcerer's Blast, which you can cast on an enemy model. That model is flung back d6 inches and suffers a Strength 5 hit. If it collides with another terrain piece or another model, there are effects there for doing extra wounds to either the model that was blasted and wounds to the model that was hit by the model that was flung back. So it's a lot of ways of saying Sorcerer's Blast hurts, but not as much as it used to hurt, because you used to be able to fling the model all the way through enemy lines. So if you had a battle line of men and spears all lined up ready for battle, stick Gandalf on a horse, running around the side, Sorcerer's Blast, you could interrupt that entire line of infantry and completely mess up someone's battle line, because they all go prone if they survive, and then you're following up with your army. So I can see why they nerfed it, but there's an element of nostalgia for the good old days of Sorcerer's Blast. But it's still a really effective spell and can get him out of some binds when it needs to. He's a great toolbox of utility. He's great at buffing and keeping his friends alive and keeping them in the fight a bit more, which is very themey with how Gandalf the Great is from the films. He wasn't that big combat piece. He could hold his own in combat, but he was never really one to fling in with the likes of Boromir and Aragorn and start carving up everyone as they come at him. With this particular array of spells, he's all about manoeuvring the enemy around, being a little bit tricksy, being a little bit shenanigan-y, almost being a little bit cheeky, as Gandalf the Grey was. As I said, some of his powers are very situational. Protection of the Valor, Collapse Rocks, Command as well, I find, is fairly situational. It's nice to pull out a key piece from an enemy rank and leave it there immobilized, but I'd rather just cast Immobilize and not have to worry about the higher casting value for Command. Strength and Will is also fairly situational, as my things either tend to die having either used all their will or die with all their will left. There's not a lot of middle ground there. So it's usually a toss-up between Blinding Light and Terrifying Aura. So I take a look at the army in front of me at the beginning of the game. If there's a lot of bows, it's Blinding Light first. If there's not a lot of bows and we can survive a turn without having to worry about getting into bow range, then it's Terrifying Aura. And bearing in mind both of these need a 2+ to go off, Gandalf always inevitably rolls a 1. And it's always bad when you think, am I going to have to commit my 3 point of might and one of my original store to get this off? His one attack does feel like it lets him down when he does get into combat, particularly when he's got the Glamdring, which gives him strength 5. So he again, like I said, he's not the combat hero. He's not the combat-y Gandalf. He can hold his own, he's got the fight value, and he's got the strength to put something down if it does get in combat with him. But if you start overwhelming him with 2 or 3 warriors against one attack with Gandalf with 3 might, less if you've channeled or had to use it to get a spell off, then you generally find that Gandalf starts taking wounds fairly quick, particularly as his defense 5. So your strength 3 warriors are wounding him on 5s. There's only so much a reroll on Fate is going to do against multiple attacks going through into him. So it's a little bit of a careful balance, I've found, in where to put Gandalf, how to play him, and how, more importantly, to keep him alive. I've genuinely found where I've misplayed him against someone's army, or even in practice games with Request of the Ringbearer, misplaying him in Balin's Tomb, We lost Gandalf before Khazad-dûm. Thankfully, that was just a practice game, and you'll find out what happens to Gandalf exactly when we go through into the actual games. But yeah, so positioning with Gandalf the Great is key. Trying to avoid him getting bogged down. That being said, he can be very hard to shift on occasions.
You shall not pass!
With the 3 points of fate, with the rerolls, he's probably not going to go anywhere too quickly. Again, if you're just careful with your placement, he can be a fairly hard one to shift if you're able to stagger the opponent getting into combat with you. But yeah, Gandalf the Grey is my personal favourite of the two variants. Gandalf the White is better, but you are paying a premium for him. Gandalf the White is 220 points, whereas Gandalf the Grey is 170. So you're freeing up 50 points there. But going into Gandalf the White, he has the same stats more or less as Gandalf the Grey. He does, however, have 2 attacks, and he is defense 6, so he's got a little bit more stay power, and he can hit a lot harder in combat. I suppose that's to represent when he's on top of the Minister of Wars in Return of the King, and he just goes ham on all the Morannon orcs that run up the siege towers to protect poor Pippin from getting absolutely shanked in the face. So he's more of a combat hero, can hold his own a bit more, just takes a little bit more pressure off of the positioning and play style of Gandalf the Grey, because you can be not that you can be more cavalier with him, but you don't have to think about it so much. If he gets bogged down by 2 or 3 Uruks or Orcs or whatever, he's fairly competent at holding his own with the 2 attacks. The only options available to Gandalf the White, however, are Shadowfax, but that's not a bad thing at all. With a slight price increase, you get a horse, which has got 2 will points and a fate point, and it's got a 12-inch move, so you're getting even more manoeuvrability out of Gandalf the White, and even more ability to get him to where he needs to be to do combat stuff or cast magical powers or do whatever he needs to do to help the rest of the army. So I think he's actually a really solid piece either way you go. Gandalf the White also gets a few more spells compared to Gandalf the Grey. So for that 50 points, you're getting access to a fair bit more than you would with Gandalf the Grey. He gains Banishment, which can only target spirit models. They suffer a wound exactly as if they would have done if they were in combat. He gains Fortify Spirit, which is another exhaustive spell. One of your friendly models can roll 2 additional dice when it comes to resisting. They can even do this if they're out of will as well, which is super good, so you don't have to worry about their will points there. He also gains...
Your staff is broken.
Which basically does what it says on the tin. If you're fighting another army which has another Staff of Power, Saruman or Radagast, anything like that, they lose the benefits of the staff, so they don't get the free will point, and they lose any benefits that the staff gives them in combat, such as the hand and a half bonus. So even more offensive and defensive buffing spells available to Gandalf the White. Yeah, he's a lot more of a combat hero. He's much more of an offensive piece and a defensive piece. I think you can boil these two down into 2 subcategories. Gandalf the White is the offensive beatstick, effectively, and Gandalf the Grey is the defensive piece who sits around the mid-tier of the board, buffing and helping out his friends and allies. However, as in typical Mithril fashion, whenever I've played my Gandalf the White or Gandalf the Grey, the combat variant has never really succeeded or excelled in combat for me, and I've always chronically misplayed my Gandalf the Grey, because I always think he's better in combat than he actually is. 1 dice in a pinch is not going to do you a great amount of favours. But yeah, so that is our little brief rundown on Gandalf. This is the first we've done for a little while, so apologies if it's a little bit lacking compared to the other ones. We'll be doing a lot more of these going forward on the channel, and good to get back into talking through stats and options for some of these models that we love. We'll be moving on to the Hobbits after this, and then we're going to finish up with the Fellowship and move on to some of the evil models. We're also going to be doing some stat breakdowns for some Malifaux, some Marvel Crisis, and potentially some Shatterpoint stuff as well. So keep an eye out for that as and when it comes. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please like and subscribe. It's always really, really very much appreciated and helps to push our content out to everyone. And as always, guys, take care and happy hobbying. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.